Welcome to Untangled, the Usability Sciences Podcast, where we help product managers and product owners try and build and maintain better products. Okay, Adrienne, we finally have agreed on a name, Untangled. You even had mugs made with it on there. You want to tell everybody how we came up with this?
Well, the name came first before we talked about the show, but Untangle the Why is, we did some research, I don't know, a couple of years ago now.
We did research?
We did research. We eat our own dog food. We did some research and we were trying to figure out what is the essence of what we do. And we came up with Untangle the Why, right? So there are all kinds of problems in the world. There are all kinds of problems in product development, research, design. So at Usability Sciences, we help you figure out why those things are happening so we can make sense of it all, so we can come up with a plan and build something.
I love it. I was, in the last week, I've watched the latest Apple presentation where they introduced their version of AI they're going to integrate into the next operating systems, Apple Intelligence. I enjoyed that presentation. And then it was yesterday that I watched a video of a guy doing a demonstration of the unpublished version of ChatGPT 4.0, and it was doing it multimodal. So he was having a real-time conversation, and it was observing through the camera the audience and making comments about it. It was crazy. But every time I read anything about AI or watch anything about AI, the first thing I think about is you and your frustrations with AI, not because you don't believe in AI, but as a researcher, your frustrations and concerns about how all of this gets built and introduced out into the world.
Yep. Because that's everybody's solution, right? Oh, we'll just put AI on there. We'll do generative AI for that. We'll just put that in the tool. We'll put that in the product. Okay, but half the people that you're designing for don't even know what that is. And then it's gotten better, right? It's gotten significantly better over the last, I don't know, year and a half since we started testing it. But you had to learn how to talk to it. You had to understand how prompts work. You had to understand things like, initially, it wouldn't even tell you the source of where it was pulling information from. So people had trust issues. But everybody's solution to every problem, it's like, oh, I'm going to use y'all example. My coffee's cold. Well, use some generative AI. Like, it's not related, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think it's getting smarter. But it really comes down to when you decide, hey, I need some sort of generative AI. What problem are you solving with that? It's a cool feature, and that's cool, and I hope it works out well for you, but it should still directly impact the user experience somehow. And do you know how it's going to impact that experience before you roll it out?
Does testing AI, is it any different than testing anything else that you normally would in terms of a product or a service?
Not at all. Not at all. So whatever that experience is, we can test it. So it's how they interact with the tool that's provided. It is, what do they do with the feedback that comes out of it? All of that is the same thing. It doesn't change. An interface is an interface to me, whether it's voice, whether it's physical, whether it's the digital space, it's all the same to research.
Is there any difference in how you would test an AI platform that you talk to versus you type in the question?
Would it change how we do it? Probably not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, today, most research is happening remotely. They're not necessarily in the lab as much, but I can capture their face. I can hear them. I can see what they're typing. So as long as that experience lives in something that I can record and interact with the person, we test it the same way.
Would you anticipate that a user's reaction to communicating with AI changes the more realistic the voice is, meaning it trusts it more or less if it sounds like a computer or sounds like somebody in this room?
I don't know. I don't know that I would have any insight into that. So when you say they're talking to it, so it's like having a conversation. Like my Alexa all over again.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the person, right? So like my phone, I have voice options. So I call my Siri, I call him Cyrus, right? Because he sounds like a black man to me. But I think then you have a preference, but no. I
Okay.
think that's something that you can explore with people. I think the bigger question is, should you have options for how or the way that voice is communicated?
Interesting. Okay. So as you and I talked about doing this podcast, we were trying to figure out what the content of the podcast would be about. We've watched a lot of other businesses kind of launch these things and figure out what their content is. And you and I pondered this a lot, but one of the big goals that we wanted to accomplish was try to answer the most common questions that you get or I get every day in terms of engaging with clients or prospective clients.
Yep.
And so the first one that I thought we would talk about and get into is the concept of MVP. What is an MVP? How does it differ across different types of products or services? And how important is it in a digital space versus some sort of physical thing?
Yep. So I want to add, and I'm going to look at the camera, I want to help product owners and product managers. That's who I want to help. So that's kind of why I've swayed us this way. And then Peter's just nice and he just let me do it. But anyway, okay, so MVP is supposed to be minimum viable product, but that's not what happens. It turns into what can we get out like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge with that becomes you're building or you're putting out products that people don't necessarily need or want yet. And you're hoping that we don't mess it up so bad that we miss the opportunity to sell to them again later. So my issue with MVP is they just kind of sit around a table and decide what goes in it without asking the people they designed it for what has to be in it. Right? So then they're just spinning their wheels unnecessarily. It drives me bananas.
In the previous episode, you and I had we had a discussion about some of the, oddly enough, AI products that have come out on the market. The Rabbit and the Humane pen that had come out, and some of the reactions to it, and it's missing. And those things felt like products that tried to hit some sort of MVP, and they just didn't understand what it should have been in the first place.
Yep.
And so that's where I think a lot of understanding what people want or would want out of a product up front should be done to help define an MVP.
Yeah, so when I teach my class, there's this image, and if you've ever heard me speak, you've seen it in my presentation. It's called the designer's paradox. I didn't make it, but I hope to make it famous. But in it, it's on the left-hand side is this picture of this really big, elaborate rocket ship with titanium everything. When I describe it to my students, like when the rocket ship takes off, Beyonce sings the Star Spangled Banner, and then when you land, Michael Jackson does some sort of moonwalk you down, right? Like it's over the top. And then in the middle of that image is just kind of like this bland, misshaped thing. Like it was probably supposed to be a rocket ship, but it doesn't have all the pieces. And it's the title of that section is what we settle for MVP. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end is like a ramp with a bicycle. And I think that is my issue with MVP. You start off with these amazing ideas, and I'm not going to say they're bad ideas, but you don't take into account the cost of that, resources, time. So then you get somewhere in the middle and you're like, I got to get it out. And you put out something that's definitely subpar to what you intended, and then nowhere near what your user needed. Means to me, I was just saying it was a waste of time and money, right, to even build it out that way.
Do you think that in a startup world, this is more of a problem because of time to get to market versus a more established and mature company?
No, I think in a startup, you only really get a couple of chances to mess that up, right? Mm-hmm. I think they tend to have less money to spend. I think this is a bigger issue in these bigger corporations, these enterprises where they're paying, developers here and they have product teams and they have all these things, but they have a bunch of red tape. I think you're seeing more wasted time and money at an enterprise level than a startup.
What are some things in terms of research that companies can do to help them better define MVP for them?
So I like this feature prioritization kind of a methodology. You can do it in a focus group. And a focus group is basically you bring 6 to 8 people of your target audience together and you ask them, hey, here's what we can build out. What features do you like? Which would you want? One of those exercises is this buy a feature. So I say, Peter, you have $100. How would you spend your $100 on these features? One of the things that you take away from that is this thing is very valuable where this thing is not. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it remotely, and I use like a card sorting tool to do this, and I create buckets that say must have, nice to have, don't want. And you take those features and then you ask the end user, the customer, which of these features do you have to have? And anything that goes in that must have bucket obviously needs to be there. Nice to have means you don't necessarily need it at launch. You might want to add it later to be a differentiator. And then don't want, that means it shouldn't be there at all and definitely shouldn't be an MVP. So you can do some things like that to have the end users, your customers, tell you what they want in there versus somebody sitting around a table arguing about what should be there.
Is MVP, does MVP include just features, or can it be information? And what I'm thinking about is how often I get very frustrated when I go to try to find information about a business or specifically a restaurant. And I look at their website and nowhere to be found easily on the front page at the very top is their address.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times we think about it as some sort of a feature or functionality. There's some things that are just table stakes, right, that should just be there. So if I'm looking for a business, I'm looking for contact information, I'm looking for an address. Same thing with like any type of e-commerce, any type of digital experience. There are some things that just have to be there, right? I need to have a way to contact somebody. I need to be able to get help if I need it. If it's a subscription-based something, I need a place to go where I can, change my credit card information or change my password. Some of those things are table stakes and should just be there. So oftentimes these conversations are specifically around like features and functionality.
What different types of people in a business should be part of the decision of what an MVP is?
I would say your product owner, product manager. If you're not leading that conversation, y'all need to redo business. They need to be there. Your tech leads, your development organization needs to be there, because as much as I like the creative space of research, design thinking, design in general, at some point you have to start making decisions, and you need to know how to assess level of effort. Well, I can come up with amazing ideas, but if my tech team can't build it, then it's not that great of an idea. So you need your tech people there who can kind of help you say what's feasible and what's not. You would probably need some kind of representation from your research team, if not your actual user, right? I've even seen that. But those are the core people that should be in that conversation. And then as well as something that's, marketing maybe, right? Let's think about their research and what have they seen their competitors are doing. That should also be part of that conversation.
So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that is a product owner, and he was frustrated because they are trying to build this new thing, this piece of software, and he was really frustrated, and mostly because people keep entering the scene and creating scope creep while he's trying to make a definition of what the MVP of this thing is. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he's really struggling, specifically with stakeholders, people who he is having a hard time managing upwards, how to maintain and wrangle in scope creep when he's got a pretty clear set of what the MVP is supposed to be.
Yeah, so when I see that happen, I know it's one of two things. One, they didn't do exploratory research and define what the offering was going to be before they started building. And I know that because if you have a design, you've tested the design, you know what features go in there, then you're just writing user stories and they go build it, right? That is the process. But when you start to see a bunch of things like scope creep, I can guarantee you the conversation. Somebody at the C-suite level is like, hey, I was on this website and I saw them do this thing and we should have it in ours. Done. Does it work for our customers? No. Did our customers ask for it? No. Is it even related to this experience? Probably not. but somebody thought it was a good idea. I also refer to them as like random shower ideas, and I'm driving in traffic crazy ideas. Like, I saw it on a billboard, we should have it. No, you shouldn't. And you have to understand that when you start adding these unnecessary features without testing them, you're still wasting time and money, because your dev team is going to try. They're going to work like hell to get it done. But then go back to what I always complain about. Everything is usability tested. And the parts that got thrown in at the end are probably going to test far worse than everything else in your experience.
So you mentioned doing some sort of exploratory research with users to help with this. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about what that looks like and how that works?
So it's the part of research that I like the most, and that's where you actually put yourself in the space of the user. So that is, we could do a contextual inquiry where I go out into the world and I watch people do things, right? We could do I think some people call it like a ride along. When I was at another company, we got to do that. They had text. I got to go ride in the car or the truck with text. And what you see in that experience is there's what people remember they do, and then there's what they actually do. So you do this exploratory research to really understand who you're designing for. Then you figure out which of their problems do you want to solve. You come up with an idea, you brainstorm and all those fun things, what they think we do with sticky notes. We do that part, and then you actually come up with a design and you test that design. And what should happen is by the end of your design cycle, then you should have put those designs, that concept in front of users. They could tell you what they want, what they don't want, how it works. And then you can go back and write very clear user stories about how you're supposed to build that thing. That should be your process. Today, people are building it first and asking questions later. I actually heard somebody say the other day, we were talking about testing something, and she's like, well, it's not built yet, we can't test it. Whoa, ma'am, wait. We can test at the wireframe level. We can test when it's just static images. I've even done usability testing literally on a napkin in a hotel lobby. Like, if you have a concept, you should put it in front of your end users to make sure that what you're thinking about is what they need, and then you build what you intended to build.
Part of the conversation I had with this guy was getting him to understand why it was so important to actually do all of this with their users.
Yep.
And not depend on stakeholders or him as a product owner or the development people or the design people. And he understood that concept, but he was having a hard time figuring out how he was going to sell that back up the chain.
So it wasn't one of your clients, it was one of Will's clients, and that's exactly the conversation. And we just did this project, so hopefully he'll still love me after. But anyway, so they had done a lot of research, actually. They did all the exploratory stuff that I'm talking about up front. They worked with students to define what the problems were and what the gap was. And the experience was for higher education. And their goal was for them to be able to come into this experience and be able to see a clear path to choosing classes and what they wanted to be when they grew up and all that good stuff. And they had done a lot of work up front. They built the thing. But to test it, they sent it out to faculty and staff. Why? Your faculty and staff is not your user. And that's what I told them, and that's, I think, probably what won us the business. I was like, so what was the point of talking to people if you never went back and tested it with the actual people that you designed it for? Like, that's a waste of money. You didn't go all the way through on the finish line. And I'm glad they did the work, because overwhelmingly, this idea, the concept that they built out, is not resonating with 18 to 24-year-olds. Who saw that coming? Like, you have to do the work, and you have to take it back to the people that you designed it for to make sure that it works. If I were to ask you, like, am I the best researcher in the world? You're going to tell me yes, right?
Yes.
You're going to tell me yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
But if I'm talking to them, they may not think that, right? So you have to take it back to the people you designed it for if you want to do it right. Because what's going to happen, it gets usability tested anyway. So you launch it, you spend all this money on it, and now your stakeholders are like, where'd the money go? Because I don't see a change in conversion. I don't see a change in enrollment. I don't see people staying longer. So we messed up somewhere.
Once upon a time, I worked for a media outlet, and we were building an application, and we did no research really on the onset and development. And we got 75% of the way through the development of building this thing when the head boss pulled the plug on it. We had spent a lot of money on it. And the answer that came back is because we hadn't done enough research on it. And this was a whole new thing. I was very young in my career at this point, and I didn't understand that. I was frustrated because we had spent all this time and effort, months getting to this point, and he pulled the plug because he was convinced that we hadn't done enough research, and it was going to be a real problem when we launched it. And that, to me, was a big turning point in my career in understanding the importance of doing all of that at the beginning because of the time and cost efficiencies you will achieve or gain by doing it from the start.
Yep. And then carrying it through to the end. So there was a bank that I used back in the day for one of my car loans. And I was one of several thousand people who logged in on the 15th when my card note was due. And they had changed the entire interface. So they had rebranded, they changed all the colors, they changed the logo, they changed the location of the CTAs. It looked like they got hacked, right? So obviously I didn't pay my card note. I called them, hey, what's going on? They're like, yeah, sorry, we changed it. But it was me and a whole bunch of other people who were calling. Again, even when you're rebranding something, it's even more important to make sure that you put it in front of people to figure out how are they going to respond. In that instance, their support costs skyrocketed because they scared the shit out of everybody. Right? Like, you can't make big changes like that and still not put it in front of your users. You just can't do it. It's not good business.
You're the world's best researcher.
I know it. I know it.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. If there was something that we talked about or discussed that piqued your interest, or you come up with a question that you'd like to ask us, you can put it down in the comments below, or you can obviously reach out to us on our website, usabilitysciences.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll be back in about a month's time.